Welcome to another episode of the CEO Story, and we have got some family office royalty in today. Ron Diamond from Diamond Wealth. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. Just to give you a quick update on Ron, he is the CEO of Diamond Wealth, and they work with over 100 different family offices, doing various amounts of investment alongside them and with them. Ron, thank you so much for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you on today.
Thank you for having me as well.
Yeah, really love to dig into what you do, how it all works. So can you just start by sharing a little bit more about Diamond Wealth, what it is you actually do, and then we can dig into it from there.
Sure. So Diamond Wealth, we work with about 100 single family offices, and these are families ranging anywhere between $250 million to $30 billion. And what we do is we act as a filter. We only in the private market. So I used to run a hedge fund, and it's very difficult, in my opinion, to create alpha in the public markets today. It was easier in the 90s when I ran my fund. So we invest in the private markets, which would be private equity, venture capital, real estate, and credit. And what I'll do is I'll put a little money in, and I'll go to the other family offices that we work with. They'll put a lot of money in, and we'll do deals. So basically, I kind of act as a filter for them, and it's private equity, venture capital, real estate, credit, things like that.
Sounds like there's a lot of big players in the game here. And we can rewind it back a little bit to give people more context on you and kind of your journey. So you've done a lot in your career so far on umpteen advisory boards, Tiger 21, you've kind of been there and done that and got the t-shirt to prove it. So you're pretty well accomplished at this stage. But if you go back a few years and kind of share your journey along the way, how did you initially get started and what kind of led you into working with family offices and wealth management and people like that?
Well, it was a bit serendipitous. I had graduated from Northwestern in 1987, and my first job was Drexel Burnham. And Drexel, for the people who are old enough on the call to remember, it was like Goldman Sachs on steroids. It was the most profitable firm on Wall Street. So I was there for 2 years, but I was also in the room when Fred Joseph, the CEO, announced that we're going bankrupt. And I'm in the room. I was 24. I had a few stock options, but I'm watching people in their 60s, 70s, 80s, literally weeping because many of them, not all of them, but many of them lost most or all of their money because they had all their money tied up in Drexel stock. It was a very surreal scene. From that, my takeaway was I will always be loyal to people, but I will never be loyal to a company. Because that can happen at Drexel, that can happen anywhere. So basically, when Drexel imploded, I moved back to Chicago, started a hedge fund, and that's kind of what my next iteration was.
Fantastic. I will always be loyal to people and not to a company. I love that. That's really powerful, that, Ron. So, okay. So then you started your hedge fund. Take us through kind of the motions and the stages, because I'm guessing at this point you were a young gentleman, devastated by what had happened, what's going on. And then what kind of pushed you into the hedge fund world? How did you raise your first set of capital? And then what did you specialize in within the hedge fund?
Well, I wouldn't say I was devastated. It was a surreal moment when it happened. And I mean, Drexel going under was like unfathomable. And I was as low as you can get. I was a trainee at the time. So it wasn't that I was devastated. It was just kind of, lessons learned. I'd be loyal to people. So that's why I wanted to start. So I started a hedge fund. I'd done fairly well in school, and I'd known some people, and they supported me. And we started off with a small dollar amount, but we ultimately got the fund to about $250 million. And I ran it for about 10 years. We never had huge returns. We never were one of these companies that had 40, 50% returns, but we did beat the S&P 10 out of 10 years. And so we did have a good performance. If the market's up 7, we're up 9, market's up 11, we're up 12. Our clients
always
are
outperforming happy. The market.
Correct. So the clients were happy. And how I got into this world, they didn't call them family offices in the 90s. They used to call them rich people. So I had a bunch of rich people who are now called family offices. So that's how I got into this market.
That's funny. Okay, fantastic. And then what you do with family offices now is pretty unique compared to the ones that we've worked with. And what I've seen is that you kind of share best practices and invest alongside them and kind of lead the way as kind of a trailblazer in this new, well, not new, but kind of evolved state of high net worth individuals. So can you share a little bit about your unique take on investing at a family office level?
Sure. Well, my thesis is that as private equity and venture capital disrupted the public markets in the early 80s, I believe that family offices are starting to disrupt the private equity and venture capital markets for similar reasons, because it's better alignment of interest. So if you have a company and in 1988, 1989, 1992, and you've got to report to somebody like me every 90 days, it's very hard to run a company efficiently. And that's really why private equity and venture capital took off. And the model made a lot of sense. 2%, it just pays for the overhead. 20%, I only make money if you make money. So it was a better alignment of interest than the public companies. The markets exploded. Venture capital and private equity exploded. Starting mostly in the early 80s. The problem is that many, not all, but many of the firms became too big. It became an AUM game, and they bastardized the business. And again, I'm generalizing, but I had a close friend who did a roll-up of logistics companies in New York. He needed $150 million for his strategy, had a great track record. The placement agent got him $500 million based on his performance. He said, terrific, I just need 150 and we'll get started. And only in New York could this happen. The placement agent literally came to his apartment in New York and wrote down on paper, 2% of $150 million equals X, 2% of 500 million equals Y. What am I missing? And my friend was a bit incredulous, and he just said, what you're missing is if I do what you want me to do, what you're suggesting, there won't be a fund two. Because I can't deploy 500 million. I can only deploy 150 efficiently. And the other 350, which you want me to take, I can only deploy in what I'll call B or C rated companies. So yes, I understand I would make more money today because I understand 2% of 500 million is more, but I can't deploy the capital. That's a microcosm. And again, I'm generalizing because it's not true with all firms, but that's a microcosm of what's happened in the industry. It's become an AUM game. And family offices right now, it's a much better alignment of interest, and we'll touch on it later, but the biggest advantage they have is something called patient capital.
Yeah, no, that's really important. I think your friend obviously has a lot of integrity at that point, because most people would see the big number and be like, oh yeah, I'll figure it out. But the fact that he stayed true to kind of his core values and understood that he wanted to hit home runs with all 150 and not take the bigger amount, definitely, I think it's the long game versus the short game. In the short term, he would have made more money. But if we think long term at all times and put our clients' interests before our own, that's where you build deeper relationships and long-term relationships. It's much more important in the long term.
And adding to that, also looking at it from the long term, that's the advantage that family offices have over private equity and venture capital. Because private equity, remember, they're in the private equity and venture capital firms, they're incented to flip companies every 3 to 5 years. It's not good or bad, it's just the way it is. Family offices are not incented to flip companies. So they would ideally prefer to hold a company for 20 years. So here's kind of what happens. You have a company that's bought by a private equity firm, and then the private equity firm will hold it for 3 to 4 years, sell to private equity firm 2. They'll hold it for 3 to 4 years, sell to private equity firm 3. And then in the 20-year period, it could have changed hands 4 times. You compare that to a family office who is not incented to flip companies. They buy the company. They don't have those transaction costs. They don't have the taxes every time the company is bought and sold, and they're just compounding everything. It's a much, much better model for long term. So I think family offices think long term. I was at a conference. Jeff Bezos gave a speech once, and he said, if you're competing with the problem with private equity and venture capital is everyone's competing on a 3 to 5 year time frame. If you're competing on a 10 or 20-year time frame, your competition is a lot less people. And that way you could survive and thrive. And that's really what's happening with family offices right now.
No, I totally agree. I think that makes a lot of sense. So if we rewind a little bit, one of the key things that I really liked about when you were with the hedge fund is that you sold it. So can you talk to us about how you sell a hedge fund, or kind of the steps you went through to get the most value out of that sale?
Well, I was wrong. I thought we were good. First of all, I will tell you, we had luck on our side, because if I ran from 1990 to 2000, we were good stock pickers, but we weren't really hedged, and we were very early in the hedge fund space. If I ran my fund in the 2000s, I would not have done nearly as well. So there was clearly an element of luck to what we did. I thought in 2000 the market was overvalued. So and we were good at picking stocks, but if the market went down, we would not be the best choice for people. So I sold to a company, an institutional firm that was more market neutral, where it didn't matter if the market went up or the market went down. I brought 100% of the capital over to that. I stayed on for 6 months, kept the capital over there, and then took about a year off and figured out what my next step was.
Fantastic. That's great kind of engineering in terms of stepping out in phases. And then what was going through your mind in terms of the thought process on what was next, and how did you come up with that answer?
Well, next was I got into Zen, I got into meditation, I got into yoga. I traveled, and after 6 months, I was driving myself crazy because I was in my early 30s, and I was hanging out with Maury at the deli, and he's 80 years old. So I knew I needed to get back in the game. So I wanted to try stuff, but I found that what I really liked is being active, staying in the game, being around people, surrounding myself with people that are smarter than me. So in everything that I do, I have taught courses at Stanford, and I chair the Disruptive Technology Center at Stanford, and I work with a lot of family offices. I always want to be the poorest and the dumbest person in the room. And I think that, my father told me once, he was a very successful banker, and he said, when you come into a meeting, you could always tell who the lawyer is and always the entrepreneur. Because a lawyer comes into the meeting and they want to show everybody that they are the smartest person in the room. Absolutely. The entrepreneur, they might be loud, they might be soft, but their goal of coming to that meeting is to find the smartest guy in the room. And that's really what I do. I surround myself with people that are best in class, that I trust, that have integrity, and that are smarter than me in various things. And by doing that, you can really grow a business.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I always like to be the dumbest person in the room, or the person learning the most, because one piece of advice my mother gave me, she was a very wise lady, bless her, was you have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so listen twice as much as you talk. And I thought it was just she's just having a go at me type thing. But as I kind of get older, I realize that it's so much more true to observe and listen and figure things out silently, rather than being the one that's doing all the talking.
Listen, and I speak at a lot of colleges and different conferences. Listening is a lost art. It's not complicated. Just don't talk and listen. And a lot of times when you're listening, you're thinking about what you're going to say as soon as the other person's done talking, but you're not truly listening to that person. So I think that one of the things that I like to do is, in the way I learn about people and the way I learn about things, is just listen. And again, it sounds simple, but it's a skill that many of us need to improve upon.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I actively try and listen and try and read a lot more than I used to as well. So I think reading is also really valuable to kind of keep that knowledge growing and then taking action from it. But I think that's a different point. One of the things that I was really interested in was issues with family offices. Main one that I came across was that I think it's around 25% of family offices make it to the second generation. And then even less, 10% make it to the third generation and 5% make it to the fourth generation. I think I read that on your website and I was like, wow, that was crazy for me to think that wealth dissipates that quickly when not managed well, with the right mindset, with the right team of people around them. Can you talk to me a little bit about why you think that is, and then things that wealthy people can do, or first generation people can do, to ensure that those percentages increase rather than decrease?
Sure. And again, family offices today are very siloed, very fragmented, and very inefficient. There's roughly 17,000 family offices throughout the world, ballpark. And they control about $10 trillion in capital. And if you think about that, the entire hedge fund universe, my old world, has about $4.5 trillion. So over twice the amount of money in family offices than the entire hedge fund universe. You combine that with the fact that over the next 15 years, $65 trillion is going to be transferred from the baby boomers to the next generation. It's the largest transfer of wealth ever. And what's going to happen is these family offices are going to get larger and larger. The problem is that most of these family offices are new. 68% of family offices were created since 2000, and half of those were created since the crash. So it's a relatively or a very new phenomenon. And I think that one of the problems is when somebody has a liquidity event, they sell their company, and the first thing they want to do is invest in a really good real estate deal or cannabis deal or private equity or venture capital deal. The first thing they should do, and I talk with them about this ad nauseum, is the boring stuff. You need to talk to an estate planning attorney. It's like the foundation of a house, because without the proper structure, it's going to fall apart. So I think what happens is you've got an extraordinarily large amount of capital in general, very inefficient hands. So just because you made $1 billion selling widgets, which was great, doesn't mean you could take $1 billion, grow it to 2, do some estate planning, wealth transfer, philanthropy, and grow the asset base. So it's a mismatch. And you look right now, every major bank, every law firm, every accounting firm, every service provider, they're trying to get into the family office market because that's where the money is.
Yeah, absolutely. And we work with a few family offices, mainly first generational wealth, and we set that foundation. So I'm really glad that you brought that up, because that's the key part that we bring up, is that we need to create the structure first that's so solid that you can then build a house, a duplex, or a hotel on top of it. It doesn't matter what you want to build into the future. As long as that foundation is solid at the core, you can go on and pass that on to the next generations and so on. Can you talk a little bit about the dynamics of that first generational wealth versus the second generation in terms of mindset, or spoilt kids, or being able to build in work ethic into the future generations that maybe they don't have that same grind as the first generation?
Sure, it's a great question. So I've got 2 beautiful daughters. They're 19 and 22. And you try to do as everything you can. I love them more than anything in the world. And you try to do everything you can to raise them. The worst thing you could do is to raise kids who are entitled. That's the worst thing. And I think the way you raise non-entitled kids is by having your children focus on gratitude. So I think that, people don't focus on, I used to think that happy people were grateful, but it's actually the other way around. Grateful people are happy. And so I think if you focus on gratitude and you realize what you have, you're more likely than not to have better chance of having success. And the first generation people, these are people that, it's not that they were necessarily really poor. They could have been middle class, but certainly they're doing a lot better than their parents or grandparents did. There's a certain drive there. The second generation in general, and I see it all the time. I mean, the kids who got the trust funds when I was in high school at 16, two kids are dead. One kid's on drugs and one kid's doing really well in a family office. But you can't just give money without them earning it and understanding the importance and also how hard it is. Because look, life is hard and it's complicated. And if you just shelter them and you don't want them to get any bruises, that's actually bad for the kids. So I think you just have to let them live in the world and let them know that, they're no more important than the waiter, the garbage person, and there's no difference between the waiter and the CEO.
Yeah, I think you that's such a great point, and you framed it in such an articulate way. It's not that happy people are grateful; it's the grateful people are happy. I love that. That's a really, really powerful phrase. And then secondly, don't over-shelter children. I don't have children yet, but definitely not going to over-shelter them and let them experience life in the world, and the bumps and bruises, as you put it, is really important to me. And definitely I see that with my nieces and nephews, to make sure that they're not entitled. So thanks for sharing that. That's really, really valuable. So as we look to conclude the podcast, where do you see the future of family offices going over the next 5+ years?
I think that we're at an inflection point right now with the amount of capital, and then with the amount of capital coming downstream in the next 15 years. So I think, again, family offices will not replace private equity and venture capital, just like private equity and venture capital didn't replace public companies. But they're going to disrupt them. And the reason they're going to disrupt them is because they've got patient capital. And what family offices need to do is get together, become less siloed, less fragmented, share best practices, and become more efficient. So it is my belief that family offices are, if it's constructed in a way where they have the proper infrastructure, it is in almost all instances a better model than the private equity or venture capital model, because it's a greater alignment of interest. But that's a big if. Very few families can do that. So right now, you look at the Pritzkers or the Crowns or the Dows, they've institutionalized it. So they can compete directly with Apollo and Blackstone. They've got a team of 55 people, and that's easy. But a family office, it might be somebody who sold their company, and their son-in-law, who's a graduate of University of Indiana Business School, who's a straight A student, is now the CIO. Or the person who ran the portfolio company that they had, who was a CFO, is now the person picking private equity. So they have to look at it more like a business. And I think that this is starting to happen. The schools right now, the smart kids who want to get into finance right now, their first choice is to get into private equity or venture capital. They don't even know what family offices are. I think in 5 years, the top
and they
kids
get overworked a lot in that world as well, right? So even when I graduated from university in England, everyone was looking for hedge funds or private equity companies to get into. And I was like, nah, that doesn't really appeal to me, because these guys are getting worked to the bone, they're burning out, or they're working for the top 4 accounting firms, they're burning out. And then what do you do after you've burnt out? I think you were going to get to this, but the family office is an option that not even many people know about. So if we're giving some advice to some younger listeners here, how would they go about getting into a family office versus a hedge fund or a PE firm?
Well, that's incumbent upon the family office community, not really the individual. So the problem is that the smart people don't really know how to find the rich people, and the rich people don't really know how to find the smart people. And what family office, if I can go to PitchBook and I can find the top private equity firms, top 50, I can find the top venture capital firms. You can't find the top family offices, because they're, by definition, they want to stay under the radar. They want to stay private. The problem is they're staying private, and that's fine. But if they're so private that they don't want to be seen at all, then the opportunities for people to want to partner with them, they won't know they exist. So I think what's going to start to happen is more and more family offices are going to start to explain kind of, here's what we look for. Right. And remember, family offices, the first, second, and third thing they do when they look to invest with somebody, can I trust the person? And then the fourth thing is, what's the track record? And from an institutional side, that's flipped. They always want to know what your 1, 3, 5 year track record on, and then they'll do due diligence. Family offices has exploded so much, primarily because families stopped trusting Wall Street.
And I don't trust Wall Street, so I don't blame them. But I think you hit on a really good point there. And it is that most family offices, the ones, especially the ones that we work with, and even the higher tier ones, they want to stay under the radar. They do not want to be in the public eye, which again hinders them getting talent, but also hinders them sharing and kind of being in an ecosystem that allows for best practices to be shared. So especially with what you do, working with so many different family offices, like I think you mentioned over 100, how do you get them to all play nice with each other and share best practices? Because in most industries that's very common, but not in this elite circles of really high net worth that want to be private specifically for their own family purposes. How do you get them to share best practices?
Well, look, family offices, especially if they've had a recent liquidity event, and usually it's public knowledge that somebody sold their company for X number of dollars, they've got one hand on their ear and one hand on their wallet, right? So everyone all of a sudden, from family members to different people that they knew in the business community, all of a sudden want, to be affiliated with them because they've got a lot of money. I think that, with what I do, I don't have we're not a multifamily office. So what I do is I invest a small dollar amount and I get other family offices to invest a lot of money. And I call it first call alpha because I don't have enough capital to be the first call. I could put in a little bit of money into each deal, but cumulatively I do. So I think the answer to the question is, what are people's agendas? Like everybody has agendas, and you just have to know at the outset, what are people's agendas? We're not selling anything. I can't, like any listener on this, there's no way for me possibly to make money or do anything is an agenda. I'm not selling anything. So I think the family offices realize that, and they understand I'm not necessarily also doing this for selfless purposes, that I'm not charging them. I do it for selfish purposes because without their capital, I wouldn't have enough capital to be the first call. So I think as long as everyone understands that there's an alignment of interest and everyone has the same agenda and they understand what the agenda is, that's powerful and it's not complicated. And the most, I speak all over the world and at different conferences, and the best compliment I ever got, which was not a compliment to me at the time, two people came up to me and said, after I spoke, that was really authentic. And I didn't say thank you and feel great about it. I was hoping they would say that was a brilliant speech or whatever, but I thought about it. And when I was speaking, I was talking about, here's not how great I did, and here's all the things I did right and all the companies I invested and how smart I am. I talked about all the mistakes that I made and all the luck that I had as well. And I think that makes a big difference. So I think authenticity, comes across and you could see it. And I'll give you just a quick example. My accountant, his name is Saul, he gets more stressed out. If I'm getting close to the tax deadline, he gets more stressed out than me. So I have to calm him down, right? And it's me who would pay the late penalty. That's the type of person you want to work with.
Absolutely. And it goes back to building a team, right? Because that's one great example with your CPA, but you want a team of people that really care that much and that are genuine and authentic. I think that's a great compliment to give someone, especially someone that's speaking on stage, because when I speak on stages, it's more about, when I see people, they're more about the bravado. I've done this, I've done that. But the humility in talking about your mistakes and what you could have done differently and sharing that with the room, it goes to show that you instantly trying to add value and impact those people in the right way rather than show how amazing you are and how great you are.
Well, look, Brene Brown did a really famous TED. I listen to a lot of TED Talks, and she talked about vulnerability. And, when I was younger, vulnerability was a weakness. You don't show any vulnerability.
Absolutely.
It's the opposite. Vulnerability is actually a strength. And we're all in this together. We're all flawed people. We all try the best we can, but just acknowledge, we're all in this together, and being vulnerable, like I said, is the highest sign of confidence, not the least.
No, totally agree. I think that's a great way to end. Being vulnerable is the highest sign of power. I totally agree with that. So Ron, thank you so much for your time. If people want to reach out to you or connect with your Diamond Wealth or with your own podcast, what's the best place for them to find all that information?
They could email me at ron@diamondwealthstrategies.com. And then the podcast is familyofficeworldpodcast.com. And basically what we're trying to do there, again, we're not selling anything. I'm bringing in other family offices. I kind of look at myself as a bit of an evangelist for family offices, for patient capital. It's really just educational. And nobody that comes on is subtly trying to sell anything. They're just kind of telling you, here's what we do and why we do it.
Fantastic. And we're going to put those links right below there for Ron's email address and diamondwealthstrategies.com will both be linked there. Ron, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciated you sharing your thoughts.
Thank you. My pleasure.
I want to thank you for today's sponsor, Together CFO, for being for allowing us the space to create such a great podcast. So if you have any tax savings that you're looking for, they have a free tax calculator on their website. Go to togethercfo.com and you can find that link below as well. Thank you.